Welcome to another segment of In Depth and Out Loud. What does the world of work look like, and how on earth does it relate to what you're currently studying? Well, my guest today is going to tell us all about that. So I'd like to welcome Shaun Swartz, who's the CEO of SK Education Solutions. But of course, his title only tells us a bit about what he does. He's got an extensive background in, training and management in institutions, schools, tertiary institutions, businesses, etc. So it really is quite broad, your areas of interest and expertise, and also your interests in technology and that intersection between technology and education. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Very exciting. Thanks so much. So yes, so I've been involved in education and in technology, and the intersection between the two of them for going on about just over 30 years. It's been quite an interesting experience. I started off starting a company actually, developing software. So that comes from the software development perspective.
Sure.
And it was actually quite an interesting thing that I ended up doing. It was just a gap in the market, I guess. We needed to create timetables. And timetables for education is the biggest nightmare around. And when you get to private colleges and private schools, it's even more complicated, because if you want to register for accounts 1 and accounts 2 at the same time, as long as you can qualify to do that, they'll let you do it. And that just makes our life even that much harder. And so that's where we started. And that was actually the very, very beginning, I would say, of artificial intelligence, because that's where the timetabling was actually an automated timetabling system. So you'd give it all the information. You'd say, these are all the students, these are all the lecturers, these are all the venues, these are all the restrictions, like the size of the venue. And you'd press a button and it would go and create a timetable for you automatically. And then you could go and adapt the timetable as you see fit.
Sure.
And at the time, we used a thing called genetic algorithms. Right. And that was really like the very beginning of artificial intelligence. And since then, we've done a lot in artificial intelligence. And obviously, over the last 14 months, since Sam Altman launched ChatGPT with OpenAI,
Sure.
The whole world changed.
Sure.
And so now everyone knows and has heard about AI. But before that, it was just in the background doing its thing all the time for many, many years, but people didn't realize that it was there doing its thing.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about, where, because you allude to how it all began, and, people, often talk about like coding and sort of creating a software. I mean, when you mention the tools that you used, in that area, I'm not quite sure how far or how long ago this was, but what were they then, and what did the landscape look like, really?
Yeah, so it's very different now.
Yeah.
But development tools have been around for a long time. It doesn't really matter which coding language you choose. The whole idea behind it is to speak that language properly. And it's all about the critical thinking skills. It's all about the way you think to write that code. So you asked me, what did we use at that time? So 30 years ago, we used a product called Delphi. It was developed by a company called Borland. I don't think Borland even exists anymore. But these days, the most popular languages are like C++, Java, JavaScript, and Python. And I think Python is like really where it's easy to get into, it's easy to learn, and you can do unbelievable stuff with it. So it's just been very interesting how it's evolved over time. And that's why I say it doesn't matter what the language is. It doesn't matter. We've got so many official languages in South Africa. It doesn't matter which one you speak, as long as you can communicate.
Yeah.
And so at the time we used Delphi. Now we use Python, JavaScript. It doesn't really matter, but you've got to learn. When you're learning about coding, you just got to use a language that's the most popular now, but you've got to keep up to date, because it's going to change very, very quickly.
Sure. And what were some of the steps in developing the software, from what you remember and in your experience?
So the most important is to conceptualize what it is that you want to create. It's actually an art. You've got to know in your mind this is what I need, and this is how it needs to work, and this is what it needs to produce. And from there, from that concept, you could draw some screens of what the system would look like. And then you can start building and developing a specification, which would then, you should send it to as many of the different departments and the people around, because everyone's going to have a different view on it. And so you got to get their feedback, because I always say, get the specification right and develop once. Because if you don't, if you rush into it, you're going to land up having to make changes to the code so many times that it's going to become like spaghetti code in the end.
Sure.
And that just becomes an absolute nightmare. Why? Because once you've launched the product and your users say to you, I need to change this or I need to change that, that's when the nightmare comes into play. Because if you've already made 1 million changes according to your specification, your code is not going to be structured well. And if it's not structured well, it's going to start causing bugs. And it's going to start, the amount of testing that you need to do is going to be a nightmare. And it's just not going to work so well.
Sure.
So plan upfront 1 million times, develop once. Then, when you're ready, you can get the testers to come on board, do the testing, quality assurance, and give it to a few users first. Make sure that those users are really happy with the system and that they're happy that it's working the way they expect it to, not the way you thought about it, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to make the system work. And if they're not happy with it, the system will never work, it will fall apart, and they're going to go looking for other products.
Sure.
So it's very, very important that quality assurance and testing and the user experience is done to the best of your ability upfront.
Yeah, and what about the scalability of the software development? Because ultimately it's going to amount to something, right?
Absolutely, and that's the biggest nightmare I ever had.
Tell me about it.
So the first version of our product 30 years ago wasn't just timetabling, it was also accounting and registrations and libraries and all these different products. And it worked so well. We had 10 users on the system, they'd use it, then all of a sudden we had 50 users, and then we had 100, and then we had 200, and then all of a sudden we started having problems. Because things would stop working. It would just go too slowly, or it would just crash and hang. And why did it do that? Because 30 years ago, I didn't have the experience I got now. And so I didn't design it for scalability. And so I designed it thinking, well, this is how it will work. It doesn't matter if it's 1 user or 1 million users, it makes no difference, but it makes a big difference. So part of the design, part of the specification, part of the way you're going to develop the code, it's really, really important that you take scalability into account, so that when you do land up with 200, 300, 400 users, the system will still work just as expected. And it's all about taking all the different parameters into account when you're designing the software system.
Yeah, so obviously for any graduate who's watching now, you'd probably say that considering scalability is something you'd have to do sort of upfront, right? As opposed to finding out.
Exactly. And when you find out, you have very unhappy users.
Yeah.
And things start falling apart.
Sure.
So upfront is so important. And I guess, the tools these days that exist compared to 30 years ago are very, very different.
Sure.
And so scalability is much easier these days. And a lot of the tools that are given as part of the development package, as part of the ecosystem for development, includes a lot of scalability tools. So it's a lot easier to do it now, but absolutely.
Sure.
Think about it up front, plan it up front. Plan 1 million times, develop once.
Sure. And I mean, in your experience in education, because you mentioned earlier about your early experiences in identifying a need with timetables. I mean, that essentially is what it's all about, isn't it? Do we need this software, to provide a solution? And I suppose that's a great way to start in understanding what those needs are.
Yes. Doing a needs analysis is the most important thing, because in my head, I knew this is what we needed. But that doesn't mean that that's what the user and what the college or the school actually needs at the end of the day. You have to do your research. You have to speak to as many different stakeholders as possible, speak to students, speak to the staff members. Now, the staff members could be the administrative staff, it could be the teachers, it could be the operations. They've all got a different perspective of how the business runs. And you've got to take all of those perspectives into account when you put that needs analysis together to ensure that the product that you deliver at the end of the day is actually what is needed and not what you think the user actually wants.
And what about products that don't quite, take off or, get to the destination you'd hoped they'd get? I mean, have you had such experiences? How do you handle that?
So I've had many of those experiences. I've started many different projects along the way. Yeah. Most of them have been still in the education field. One of them was to bring international exams to South Africa so that when you were ready to do your degree, you could actually already have some credits which you could transfer over to an American university at the end of the day.
Wow.
And we did that. We brought it in. We spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time. We were the first company outside of America to ever get the accreditation to offer these exams.
Wow.
And the only reason we got it is when I picked up the phone the first time and I said, listen, I want to register these exams. Can we go about it? I'm from South Africa. They didn't hear South Africa. They heard South America. And so they just thought it's fine. They'll just continue doing it. And they worked with us. And then it was time to start the process of them coming to us to do their audits and to do their reviews. And so, well, it's actually in South Africa. You've got to get on an airplane for 16 hours and fly here and do the audit. And then they realized, well, it's actually too late now to go back. But so they allowed us to go through the process.
Sure.
The rest of the professors and everyone else that was involved in the audit ended up doing it online. In those days, there was no such thing as Zoom.
Sure.
So we used Skype in those days, and everyone joined.
Yeah.
And we put it all together, and we did it. And we got it accredited, and we offered these exams. But I think we were way too early coming to market, and so it just didn't work at the time. Maybe if we would have gone and said, okay, what can we adapt? How can we change the marketing? What can we do differently? But it was such an expensive process that we actually decided we'd leave it. But yes, finding the correct specific requirements to market is very difficult, and you've got to keep changing that recipe over and over and over again until you find something that actually does work for the market.
Sure, and of course there's many other things that aren't necessarily technical, but are more about life and endurance that one would need in this journey of software development. What would you say that is, in your experience, and to any graduate watching now?
I think the first thing is a lot of patience. You've got to be able to think very analytically. You can't just be all over the place. You've got to be very focused and know what you want, and really think step by step by step by step, and be able to see the end goal, which might only be in 2 years' time when you finish this development. But it's a long process. It's a difficult process actually, but you've got to keep your eye on the goal. But you've got to plan one little step at a time. You cannot do step 10 until you've done all 9 steps before that. It's very, very important. And have that goal in mind. And start with that specification. Do not jump into coding straight away, because you can create what's called a MVP, like a most viable product, but actually at the end of the day, that's just a specification. Just put it down in writing, think it through 1,000,000 times, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in trouble at some point. So that to me is the biggest thing, is just write it down, think it through 1,000,000 times before you start typing any code at all.
And then we look at the world we're in today with artificial intelligence. I mean, what is that? When Shaun describes it now in present day, what is artificial intelligence?
Sure. So I guess in theory, it's a branch of computer science, specifically designed to enable a computer to do something that it normally wouldn't be able to do, that normally only a human being with human intelligence would be able to do. And there's so many factors around artificial intelligence. Obviously, the most popular one now that everyone's talking about is ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT is just a product using what's called a large language model solution to enable you to speak to a computer in English. That's all it is. But it's an amazing tool. It really is. It's changed the face of the world because we've used it in so many different ways already. And I'll give you an example. In sales, we get prospective students contacting us all the time. And they ask us, how do I register? How much is the course? What is the course all about? All the information relating to that. Now, those are standard questions. Why must I answer them? Why must a human being answer them?
Sure.
So we've integrated the ChatGPT engine into our sales process. So when everyone talks to us on WhatsApp, they don't even know it, but they're talking to a computer. And most of the time, they actually say, thanks so much, have a great evening. They don't realize that they're actually talking to a computer.
Yeah.
But that is actually a very small part of AI. To me, the biggest part is enabling a computer to make a prediction. And that is what we've been using for many, many, many years.
Sure.
And how do you teach a computer to make a prediction about something?
And why is that important?
Well, I mean, that's our world that we live in now. A very simple example, a bank. A bank you want to buy a house. You want to apply for a mortgage bond from the bank. The bank needs to know that you're going to be good for the money. What do? They contact a credit bureau to check if you're going to be good for it. How do they know if you're going to be good for it? They've got this massive amount of data on you and people like you that they store and they analyze this data. So they've got people, they can match your profile of what you look like, how you transact with your bank, with when you go to Edgar's or whatever to buy things on credit. They take all that information and the system says, okay, let's find another 1,000 people like you that have very similar data sets in the background. And they've got not thousands, but they've got millions of these. And they say, okay, based on these, let's look at the top 1,000 of them. How have they behaved with their mortgage bonds? Have they paid every month on time? Have they been good for the payment, whatever it may be? And based on that, the system will say, okay, I can make a prediction that you're going to be good for it, or that you're not going to be good for it. And so based on that, the bank will then make their decision whether they're going to give you the mortgage bond or not. And so that's where these predictions come into play. And that's just one example of a million. I mean, we use them all the time in education as well. It's just all over the place. We don't even realize it. Even in Google, you want to start typing something, it's going to predict what you are going to be looking for and make suggestions. That's using AI in the background.
Sure. And I suppose there's been a huge debate around the value of AI, the benefits versus the problems, the dangers, etc. And when you talk about, Google wanting to almost get a sense of what you're going to start typing, some people don't want that. Some people feel that that's dangerous. What is your sense on that thinking?
So I think that the most important thing is that these companies, especially the big ones like Google and OpenAI, and the companies that are providing the infrastructure to be able to use AI, these guys need to ensure that they are ethical, that they are transparent with whatever they do, and they just need to ensure that they play the game properly, because if they don't, it can become a major, major problem. And now governments are getting involved. I mean, there was a summit last year about AI and the ethical boundaries relating to that. And the governments are now insisting that companies like OpenAI and all the other big ones start providing the governments with a lot of information and a lot of data as to what they're doing and how they're doing it, and being transparent so that the governments can ensure that there's not these funny things happening in the background with this data.
Sure.
Because privacy is a major, major thing. I mean, we here in South Africa have the POPI Act. And that is privacy. You can't just share all this information. But the AI engines, they don't worry about your name and your phone number. The most important thing to them is your profile. So when they see the 1,000 other people applying for a bond like you are, it's got nothing to do with your name or your ID number. It's just they've taken all that private data out before they even receive it and process it. And so AI is here to stay. We just need to ensure, and that's, I guess, what the government's job is, to ensure that they remain ethical and transparent and doing what's right to ensure that AI can serve us as humans and not the other way around.
Yeah, and as graduates that step out into this world, with the advent of AI and its limitless possibilities, what do you say, they need to consider about this world that they're walking into, and that they live in?
You have to embrace AI. You don't have a choice. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs, and things are changing so quickly. Even learning, the way you learn, the way we develop our learning systems now, it's all 100% individualized. You get your own individualized learning plan. And so all graduates, they have to embrace AI to some extent. They don't have to work in AI, but they need to know that it's there, and they need to think about how to use it and how to integrate it into their existing systems, just like I did. We've integrated in multiple ways in our systems over the last year. Why? Because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. And we won't have a company in a year's time because somebody else will be doing what we should have done. And so it's really, really important to embrace it. But at the same time, studying towards learning how to use AI, data analytics, data science, statistics, all those components, and Python is part of that. It's a really big part. Learn that. Learn those components, because if you don't, in 3 years' time, you'll find yourself being able to speak a coding language that's just completely meaningless. You've got to keep at it all the time. You can't be 3 years behind the curve.
So Shaun, as somebody who's well invested in education and obviously the importance of technology and artificial intelligence in that regard and in that space, you obviously have to keep yourself up to speed with all the trends and innovations in technology. Take me through them, albeit in your own space or even in other areas that have really just grabbed you, and speak to this world that you alluded to in our conversation.
So AI is obviously a massive trend.
Sure.
But just leaving AI aside, to me, the other big trend, it's been around a bit longer, is the blockchain. It is an unbelievable technology. And everyone's heard of Bitcoin.
Right.
But actually, Bitcoin was developed because it was developed on top of a framework called the blockchain. And what is the blockchain? It's really like a ledger of information, and it stores information in such an incredible, clever way that they were able to develop blockchain that doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't sit on any computer. It's just there, which is the most amazing thing. And I dabbled in blockchain, in Bitcoin, going back 10 years already. I bought some Bitcoin. It's the most amazing thing to experience. And I was just playing with it at the time. I bought, about 8 years ago, I bought a Bitcoin. It was probably about $400. It's now sitting at $66,000. So it's changed a huge amount. But I can tell you a story about Bitcoin. So at the time, I didn't know anything about it. I just bought it. I thought, okay, but how do I use it? What's the point of buying it if you can't use it? So I found another company called Zappo. They don't do this anymore, but at the time, 8 years ago, you could get a debit card, a Visa debit card from them. And normally with a debit card, you just load money onto the debit card, and you can go to Spar, Checkers, and pay with your card and do what you need to do. These guys, they said, don't put rands into your debit card, put Bitcoin into your debit card so that you can go to Checkers and spar and buy whatever you want to buy. And so I got one of these cards and I did it. I went, my offices were in Norwood. I walked down the road to Spar, and one of my kids for a project needed a very, very big box of Smarties. So I needed Smarties. So I went all the way down to Spar, went to the chocolate aisle, took the biggest box of Smarties I could, went to the till, swiped my Zappo debit card that had Bitcoin on it, and it worked. And I bought the box of Smarties with Bitcoin instead of with rands. So it showed that the technology is there and you can actually use Bitcoin for something other than speculation. In hindsight, I shouldn't have used that Bitcoin to buy those Smarties, because if I convert it into today's terms, I paid approximately 12,000 Rand for that box of Smarties.
And I suppose those are some of the concerns that people have, naturally?
Well, they're worried about the fluctuations in the Bitcoin.
Yes.
So it's a big thing. The reality is that it's very unstable at the end of the day. It's up and down. 3 years ago, it was at $60,000, then it dropped to 25,000 overnight. So yeah, you can lose everything. But it's become a lot more accepted in the financial world. The big financial companies out there, American included, are now in their funds are starting to invest in Bitcoin. And so it will become a lot more stable. And if the biggest investment funds in the world are investing in Bitcoin, I think it says something as well. It needs to be part of somebody's portfolio. It doesn't have to be a huge part, but it definitely has to be a part. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It can be a cryptocurrency, and there are hundreds of them. So they've created this investment platform that you can take your rands or dollars and actually own a whole set of cryptocurrencies just to spread your risk. And you buy a little bit here, a little bit there. You don't have to buy a fortune. But it's definitely part of the future. And you need to at least understand, if you're not interested in Bitcoin itself, you have to, as a graduate, you have to understand what the blockchain is, because it's a big part of the current and the future.
Shaun, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on current trends and even your beginnings. And I think a lot of graduates will certainly be moved by your story here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed having the chat.
Lovely stuff. Shaun, of course, is incredible and has done extensive work in these spaces. And if you look at just how wide it is, it gives you a sense of what is absolutely possible. So thank you so much for joining us. Once again, in depth and out loud, making sure that you are connected to the big world out there.